It's 2001 and you're at the mall. You go to the candy store with the bulk bins full of sugar other kids have put their hands in. All along the walls are posters for South Park and The Matrix. You grab a bag of sour ribbon candy and head up to the front counter. There you are greeted by a massive collection of Beanie Babies in clear plastic display boxes. Behind the counter is a wall of booster boxes from all the latest card games. You recognize 2 of them, but there are dozens more scattered to the edges, $2 to $3 a pack. Today's episode covers the great collectible card game boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. We're going to cover the history of the genre, the major players, and go over some of the lesser-known games that didn't survive the test of time. Long-running companies versus quick money grabs. Get out your binders and sleeves. We're going to start this off with the main culprit for this movement, a little company from Seattle called Wizards of the Coast. They created games like Magic the Gathering in 1993, Vampire the Eternal Struggle in 94. In 96, they did Netrunner, Battletech, and Rage the Apocalypse. In 97, they did SimCity the card game and Dune Eye of the Storm. Wizards had an ARC system, which was a short-lived collectible card game system released in 1998. The ARC stood for Allied Race Card. The system was designed to allow players to use cards from different games to play against each other. The system was based on a simplified version of Magic the Gathering's Deckmaster system, which was the underlying game engine for several of the early card games. The ARC system games were designed with a common set of card types, like resources, characters, combats, to ensure compatibility. This is also why the back of your Magic card has the word Deckmaster on the very bottom, which does nothing in the game nowadays, but that's what that was from. The goal was to create a shared cross-IP gaming universe, allowing fans from different franchises to pit their heroes against each other. The games released under this system were things like Xena Warrior Princess and Hercules Legendary Journeys, another game called C-23, which was based on a comic book from Wildstorm. The ARC system did not achieve the widespread success of Magic the Gathering and was ultimately discontinued. The concept of a shared universe for different IPs would later be revitalized by Wizards of the Coast with their use of Universe Beyond sets. In 1999, Wizards published the Pokemon trading card game. In 2001, they published the Simpsons trading card game. In 2003, the Neopets trading card game. And in 2004, Duel Masters trading card game. But we're here for the card game that started all this mess, Magic the Gathering. In the beginning, there were trading cards. There were also card games. A few companies tried to merge these two together, but one finally got it right. In the early 90s, Richard Garfield had come up with a board game he called Robo Rally and was looking for a game publisher to make his dream a reality. He pitched the idea to a small-time RPG publisher called Wizards of the Coast. Peter Atkinson, the founder, told Garfield he liked the idea of Robo Rally, but it was going to be too expensive to produce due to all the pieces it needed. Because Wizards had the means and budget to print cards, they asked Garfield to come up with a card game. He came up with a game he called Magic, but you can't trademark the name Magic, so they changed it to Mana Clash. But since everyone kept calling it Magic anyway, they went ahead and added the Gathering to the end of the name to give it something they could trademark. The first set debuted at Origins Game Fair in 1993. Wizards had printed a year's supply of product, over 2.5 million cards. The game did so well at the fair that they immediately sold out afterwards. This was the initial print run known as Alpha. The reprint, known as Beta, had a much wider release at over 7 million cards. This also sold out just as quickly as the Alpha set. The game was taking off very quickly. These first 2 print runs contained booster packs and starter decks. The starter decks were a mixture of common and uncommon cards and a few rares and enough land to scramble a deck together. Typically, they were a 60-card deck with 2 rares, 13 uncommons, 45 commons, and a rulebook. Booster packs at the time had 15 cards and were made to supplement your collection. The rulebook at the time was more of a guide than a hard set of rules. If you ever played Magic now, you know that the text on the card overrides any outstanding rules. This can be tricky when 2 cards create conflict with each other. During the early days, you just had to work it out between the players. Modern games have literal judges on standby to make decisions when this happens. The cards themselves look a little different than Magic cards do today. The back of the card hasn't changed since the start, but the most obvious thing you'll notice on the card are the borders. They're more rounded than the sets that came after it. They also have little white dots at the corners where the card art hits the black border. Once the first 2 printings sold out, a much more accessible version called Unlimited was created. These cards had standard corners, but instead of a black border, they had white borders. Moving forward, cards with white borders meant that the card was a reprint, and later on were reserved for pre-constructed decks. After Unlimited came the third set of the year, called Arabian Nights, which was the first expansion set. In 1994, Revised came out, and it was a reprint of Unlimited, but with about 30 cards removed from the set. This included Ancestral Recall, Black Lotus, and all 5 of the Mox cards. You might know these better as the Power 9, cards considered too powerful for balanced gameplay. In 1994, they released Antiquities, Legends, The Dark, and Fallen Empires. In 1995, 4th edition, Ice Age, Chronicles, and Homelands. In 96, they only released 2 sets, Alliances and Mirage. In 97, they released Visions, 5th edition, Weatherlight, and Tempest. In 98, they released Stronghold, Exodus, Unglued, and Urza Saga. In 1999, they released Urza's Legacy, 6th edition, Urza's Destiny, and Mercadian Masks. In 2000, they released Nemesis, Prophecy, and Invasion. In 2001, they released Plane Shift, 7th edition, Apocalypse, and Odyssey. In 2002, they released Torment, Judgment, and Onslaught. In 2003, Legions, Scourge, 8th edition, and Mirrodin. In 2004, they released Darksteel, 5th Dawn, and Champions of Kamigawa. In 2005, they released Betrayers of Kamigawa, Saviors of Kamigawa, 9th edition, and Ravnica City of Guilds. In 2006, they released Guild Pact, Dissension, Cold Snap, and Time Spiral. In 2007, there was Planar Chaos, Future Sight, 10th edition, and Lorwyn. 2008, we have Morningtide, Shadowmoor, Eventide, Shards of Alara. In 2009, we have Conflux, Alara Reborn, Magic 2010, and Zendikar. In 2010, we have Worldwake, Rise of the Eldrazi, Magic 2011, and Scars of Mirrodin. In 2011, we have Mirrodin, Besieged, New Phyrexia, Magic 2012, and Innistrad. If you're still listening to this podcast, I got into Magic between the Invasion and Onslaught blocks. My first starter kit was the 8th edition one with the CD-ROM that I tried to find in my old stash of high school junk, but I could only find the instruction booklet. I also bought a 7th edition Precon, the Armada deck. Commander didn't exist yet, and all products were still catered to new players who wanted to have a quick 1v1 game with their friends. Anyway, on to the gameplay. A game that does this well for so long has to be fun to play, right? When Richard Garfield was coming up with the concept of the game, he was thinking about when he was a kid playing marbles. When you play marbles, the winner gets to keep the marbles that are knocked out of the ring. Not a big deal when marbles are a dime a dozen, and the glass balls can just be won back the next game. But with a card game, especially a trading card game, not all the cards have the same value, but that's for a good reason. During the first few years of the game, Magic had a mechanic called ante. A normal game starts by both players drawing 7 cards and rolling a dice to see who goes first. During the early days of this, after you drew your 7 cards, you drew an 8th card and set it aside face up for everyone to see. Now this was random, so it could be a land, it could be a common, or it could be your Black Lotus. Ante obviously didn't sit well with casual players and was quickly phased out of the standard rule set. You can still play this way if you want, and I think it would be a good thing to use and bring back to draft events. For all Magic games moving forward, the gameplay is as follows. 2 players create a deck of 60 cards. To begin the game, roll dice to see who goes first. The person going first doesn't draw on their first step. Each player then draws 7 cards and takes a look at them. For Magic to work, you need to be able to play cards. If your first hand has no mana or only creatures with high mana cost, you need to do what's called a mulligan. This is where you shuffle the hand back into your deck and draw 7 more cards and place 1 card on the bottom of your deck. If you still have a bad starting hand, you can continue to do this, but each time you place 1 more card at the bottom of your deck. It's best not to do this more than 3 times and maybe shuffle your deck better next time. Anyway, during their turn, the players draw 1 card and play 1 land card. The person who goes first can't draw on their first turn. Then both players take turns playing cards from their hands. The types of cards in Magic include land cards, which generate mana, which is required to cast the other cards. Creatures are played by tapping land equal to the mana cost of the card and placed in the battlefield. When first placed, they have summoning sickness and can't attack for 1 turn. Enchantments are cards that are placed out near your lands, and they stay in play until another card ability removes them. These have a global effect for 1 or both players. When something happens, do this. Another card type is artifacts. These are typically temporary cards. Placed near your enchantments, they are usually discarded after use. Instants and sorceries are spells that happen instantly, and typically either deal direct damage to a player or creature, or there's something like a counterspell that stops another card from being played. To play the cards, each player starts off with a deck known as Library. Each card is called a spell. The back of the card looks like a book. Imagine Gandalf and Saruman playing spells by throwing cards at each other. After a spell is played, it either stays out on the battlefield or is discarded into the graveyard. When your creatures die, they also go to the graveyard. Some cards can be exiled, and this removes them from the game entirely. Why is it 2 different things? Because some cards can be played from the graveyard. Now, there are various ways to play with these cards. You can make a deck out of lots of creatures to fight for you, or make a deck with tons of sorcery cards to do direct damage to a player, or you can make a deck that causes the other player to discard cards from their library to the graveyard. This is called milling, and it's the worst. I hate those decks. Each player starts a standard game of Magic with 20 hit points. Normally, you'd use a d20 to track this, but there's a nice app on your phone that makes this really easy. You can win the game by having the other person draw all their cards in their library, or getting their hit points down to 0. There's also something called poison counters that later sets use, and once you hit 10 poison counters, you lose the game. It's very hard to get rid of those. The vast majority of games I've played end with one player reaching 0 hit points. Some rare cards have a win condition written on the text. If you do this expensive or difficult thing, you win the game. Those cards and the poison counter mechanic are kinda lame. How do we know what to expect from every card, or even start planning what to put in a deck? That comes from a little thing known as the color pie. Yes, I saved the color pie for last. I'm almost done with Magic, I promise. Magic has 5 colors: white, blue, black, red, and green. Well, 6 because there's colorless cards, and there's also multicolored cards, but the main pieces of the color pie are the white, blue, black, red, and green. Each color has its own set of typical abilities and mechanics associated with it. Combining 1 or 2 colors is its own strategy as well. Just knowing what colors your opponent is running will let you know what kind of game to expect. For example, red is made up of lots of little 1/1 goblins and lizards with haste and fireballs and lightning strikes. Red attacks quickly and often. Green has lots of large, expensive creatures and abilities to get more mana to cast them. Black has the ability to debuff and destroy other creatures, as well as play creatures from the graveyard. White has healing abilities and flying angels that are hard to hit. Then there's blue. Blue has a large sea creatures and a metric ton of spells to stop the other spells from being played. Most people combine 2 of the colors for a deck to take advantage of these traits and abilities. I'm going on at length about this game because it is the reason we have the rest of the games I'm about to go over. You wouldn't have the card game boom without the success of this game, and the next one on the list. I'm also using terms from Magic to explain mechanics of other card games. So how was Magic actually doing in the mid-2000s? Well, it's pretty well, considering. This was a time when Magic was still using the older style for the card borders and fonts people said were hard to read. You could still buy starter decks and boosters at the store. Magic survived the mid-2000s after so many of these other games crashed and burned. They had backed off from the dark and scary aspect of demons and evil things that had it banned by parents for being like Dungeons and Dragons during the Satanic Panic. They were saying the same thing about Harry Potter teaching kids magic spells and Pokemon being about summoning demons. Hasbro purchased Wizards in 1999 and has kept it going since. By the mid-2000s, the game had introduced something called Planeswalkers and a new game format called Commander. You can still go to any game shop on a Friday night and play an event. Some new sets do very well, some sets flop. This past year, they have been adding more outside IP called Universes Beyond, which is causing problems with some of the player base, but on the whole, the game is doing record numbers. Now the second game, Pokemon. I know what you're thinking. This is where I tell you I've bought Pokemon cards as a kid and kept everything in binders pristine grade 10 for decades. Unfortunately, this game came out in 1999, the same time I started high school. Pokemon at the time was a popular cartoon and video game for the Game Boy Color, for children. When we were in high school, it wasn't cool to do anything that was for little kids, and Pokemon was absolutely a little kid's game. We even had a buddy who brought his binder to school, and he got made fun of for having baby cards. That binder's probably worth more than my house right now. But yeah, we were all into Dragon Ball Z and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and X-Files. We were way too grown up for Pokemon and Harry Potter. The Pokemon trading card game was first launched in Japan in October of 1996. The game was developed by Creatures Inc., a company closely tied to the Pokemon brand. It was designed to translate the gameplay of the original video games with their focus on battling, evolving, and collecting. At the initial release, the base set featured 102 cards with the iconic Pokemon like Charizard, Blastoise, and Venusaur. It was an instant hit. In 1999, at the peak of Pokemania in the United States, Wizards of the Coast, the company behind Magic the Gathering, licensed the rights to publish the Pokemon TCG in North America. This was a critical turning point. The game's simple rule set, combined with the immense popularity of the Pokemon video game, made it incredibly accessible to a new, younger audience. The Western release became an enormous success, rivaling and sometimes surpassing the popularity of other games. In 2003, Wizards of the Coast's publishing license expired, and the Pokemon Company took over the worldwide management of the Pokemon TCG. This marked the start of the EX era with the new mechanics and shift from the card design. Wizards of the Coast sued Nintendo, accusing them of violating a patent, but the dispute was settled out of court. So how does this game work? Decks are made up of 3 card types: Pokemon cards, energy cards, and trainer cards. Just like the video game, you can only have one Pokemon out in the battlefield at a time, but have access to a few other Pokemon as backup. Your active Pokemon is placed out in the middle of the play area across from your opponent's active Pokemon. Up to 5 backup Pokemon can be placed on a bench area behind your active Pokemon and be summoned up if your active one is defeated or you retreat, or card ability allows you to swap. Energy can be placed on any Pokemon once per turn and be placed on the active or bench Pokemon, allowing you to swap out a weaker or weakened Pokemon for a fully evolved, developed, powered-up Nightmare sitting on your bench. Once you defeat a player's Pokemon, you get to collect a prize card from the small sideboard of 6 cards you place face down before the game starts. Collecting all your prize cards wins you the game. You lose the game if you have no cards to draw or Pokemon available to play. This is a creature-heavy game, and the majority of your deck will be various multiples of your chosen Pokemon. Because this game is still played today, you can go to your local game store and find out their Pokemon schedule, typically during the day on Saturdays or Sundays, as Magic is typically played on Friday and Saturday nights. If you can't get to a shop and don't have access to physical cards, you can play and learn using the Pokemon TCGP app on your phone or tablet. It will try its hardest to get you to spend money, but it's free to play, and you can use the starter decks to learn and have fun playing against other people. The biggest draw for Pokemon these days isn't the card game part, but the collectible part. You can't keep sealed product on the shelf because scalpers and bots will buy up all the product and flip it. The cards in the packs aren't worth the prices they're charging. If you bought a case of booster boxes hoping for one expensive hit, even if you got it, you wouldn't cover your cost of the case. So cards stay sealed on speculation that the hit could be in multiple packs. The actual cards themselves can be purchased for a few cents on sites like TCG Player and eBay. If you want to build a deck for your kids or yourself, order the singles. Collectors have lots of bulk after chasing hits. The next game company is called Decipher. You might recognize this if you played any of the Star Wars games during high school. In 1994, they created Star Trek: The Next Generation customizable card game. In 1995, the Star Wars Collectible Card Game. In 1999, the Young Jedi customizable card game. In 2002, Star Trek: The Next Generation customizable card game 2nd edition. In 2001, the Lord of the Rings trading card game. And in 2004, Wars trading card game. When I was in high school, my boyfriend and my husband and all their friends played the Star Wars customizable card game. The game was super crunchy, is all I'm going to say. It was very difficult and had a large learning curve. There were 2 types of cards, light side and dark side, to fit the theme of the movie. Each player controls either the light side or the dark side of the Force. You had to play as either one of those. The primary objective was to make sure your opponent loses the Force, which means reducing their life deck down to 0. Card types included locations, like battlefields, the Death Star, Endor, Tatooine, there were planets or systems. Character cards like Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Han Solo, starships in every possible vehicle you could imagine. Effects cards were like instants, weapons, interrupts. There were tons of other cards that worked similar to the way Magic did. Each player starts with a deck of 60 cards called a Force pile. The game's currency, known as the Force, is represented by cards in the pile. Players draw a hand of cards from their deck. At the start of their turn, the player generates Force by drawing a number of cards from the top of their deck and placing them into the Force pile, the amount of Force generated by the determined Force icons on the location cards they control. At the beginning of their turn, a player adds cards from the Force pile to the Force pool. Cards in the Force pool are used to play the Force cost of playing cards from their hand. Players use the Force from their Force pool to play cards onto locations on the table. Players would engage in space or ground battles at contested locations. When the battle occurred, players would compare the combined power of their characters and ships. The losing side would have their cards lost, meaning they were moved from the table to the lost pile. When a card was lost from a player's hand, deck, or a character was defeated, the player would also have to lose Force, which meant placing a card from their Force pile to the lost pile. The game was won when one player's Force pile was completely depleted. This set had a lot of expansions. In 95 was a premiere set based on the first film. In 96, there was a New Hope, Hoth. In 97, there was a Dagobah set and a Cloud City set. In 98, there was a Jabba's Palace and a Special Edition set. In 99, there was Endor and Death Star 2. In 2000, there was a Coruscant, and in 2001, Theed Palace was the last set based on The Phantom Menace. Decipher's license to produce the Star Wars CCG expired and was not renewed. At the time, Lucasfilm was negotiating new deals with various new companies. A new license was ultimately granted to Wizards of the Coast, which was now a subsidiary of Hasbro. Wizards of the Coast went on to create a different game called the Star Wars Trading Card Game in 2002. You'll notice that a lot of card games, when they switched to a different publisher or when they came out with a new version of it, it would go from collectible card game to trading card game or something similar, just a slight change of words. the company made a decision to focus on other intellectual properties. After Star Wars, Decipher shifted its attention to its new license of Lord of the Rings, which released in 2001. This became their flagship game for the next few years. A bunch of my friends actually did buy the Lord of the Rings starter decks and would play it during school. Next, we have Score Entertainment. This one's going to take a minute as well. Located in Arlington, Texas, Score was a trading card company from the 80s known for making sports cards. In the 90s, its parent company was bought by a subsidiary of Playoff Dondurus, and the Score brand was set aside for their attempt at the CCG market. Most of their games were based on popular anime titles at the time, anime that just so happened to be licensed by nearby Funimation. In fact, the Funimation logo is on the wrappers for the DBZ booster packs right next to the Score logo. In 2000, they created the Dragon Ball Z collectible card game. In 2001, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer customizable card game. In 2002, the Fruits Basket, Friends of the Zodiac card game. In 2003, Yu Yu Hakusho trading card game. In 2004, Inuyasha trading card game. In 2006, Bleach trading card game. Now, of all those games, the one I played was the Dragon Ball Z game. It was the first big card game I bought into and played during high school. I was a sophomore when it came out, and my boyfriend at the time was big into the Star Wars game. But when we saw the DBZ card game at the local comic shop, I knew we finally had a card game we could play together. We got our first starter kits at Ground Zero Comics. It's still alive and kicking, and you should visit them. Back then, starter kits ran about $15 to $17, depending on where you bought them. The candy shop kiosks in the mall sold Pokemon cards, Magic, and DBZ, but had higher prices. You would go there if the comic book store was sold out. The DBZ CCG was sold like most other CCGs. It had starter kits and booster packs, but in this case, you needed the starter kit to play the game. You couldn't just buy a bunch of boosters and make a deck. This game ran similar to a game of Commander in Magic the Gathering, where you as the player have a main personality card that you have to actively battle with. Like Pokemon, characters had levels and could level up as the game progressed. You needed at least 3 levels of your main personality to use them in the game, and the only way to get those first levels was with the starter kit. Luckily, starter kits were well balanced, and you really only needed to buy 2 to play. The starters came in 2 flavors, heroes and villains. You didn't know which main personality would be in the starter kit either, so if you picked a villain deck hoping for Vegeta, you might end up with Raditz or Nappa. The hero options for the first set were Goku, Piccolo, Gohan, and Krillin. These main personality cards had a column of numbers on the right-hand side that went from 0 up to several thousand. When you leveled up your character, these numbers also went up. To perform certain attacks, you would use those numbers as your power level to figure out how much damage to give and take by moving a plastic scouter up and down the column on the card. The first set covered the Saiyan saga of the show, with all the card art being stills from the episodes. It's fun to go back and watch those episodes and point out the scenes they took the images from. As far as gameplay, there were main personality cards, attack cards, defense cards, non-combat cards, and allies. Allies were obviously other heroes and villains from the show that were available in the booster packs, but they were played like creatures would be in Magic and would take damage for you. But the majority of the game was combat-based. There were 2 types of attack cards, physical and energy attacks. Physical attacks use your character's power level to pay for and deal damage. Energy attacks would do damage by making the other player discard cards from their life deck. Casting costs would include extra power stages, discarding cards from your own life deck, or discarding that attack card from the game after use. Defending yourself was similar. A defense combat card could be played by the defending player the same way you would counterspell in Magic. Most defense cards had extra text and abilities like stop an energy attack, lose 3 power stages. Non-combat cards worked like enchantments or artifacts. Drills stayed out and applied some modifier to the remainder of the game. The others were one-time use cards like Sensu Bean that let you heal your main character at any time and the card was discarded afterward. Then there were the Dragon Balls. These were non-combat cards that could be used and discarded, but if you had all 7 in your deck somewhere, you wanted to keep them out and play. The game would end if either player lost all their life cards or someone collected and played all 7 Dragon Balls. There was another option, where whoever got to the highest power level first won, but we would be playing with even-leveled characters, so if I had Gohan 1 through 5, my opponent would have Cell 1 through 5, because winning by leveling up is very, very easy. The first few years of the game went great. The first set, being the Saiyan saga, was a nice introduction to the game and evenly matched, but soon things started to ramp up out of control. The second set was the Frieza saga. This had no starter kits, but had higher levels of main personalities in the boosters. The most valuable card in the whole game is from this set, and you can guess what it is. It's the ultra-rare, level 4 Super Saiyan Goku. This card had a power level of 900,000. Compare that to the max level of Vegeta at 180k at level 3. Frieza wasn't even really playable yet. He was also an ultra rare, but at level 1 and could only be used as an ally. He would show up in the Trunks Saga starter kits as a villain, and Vegeta was now an option in the Hero starter decks. After the Trunks Saga was the Android Saga, another booster-only set. Then came the best and really the last set we dumped money into, the Cell Saga. We even drove to Arlington for the pre-release tournament. It was fun playing with other actual players and not just each other. At this point in the game, there were enough levels of other side characters that you could use people like Yamcha, Xiaotzu, and Bulma if you wanted to. But not long after the Cell Saga, the power creep became obvious and unsustainable. Base cards from the new starter decks were worlds away from the Saiyan starter decks. Your character would do max damage no matter what. Plus the other sets were things like Cell games, World games, Babidi Saga, Buu Saga, Fusion Saga, and ended with the Kid Buu Saga. I know we bought a box of World games and Buu Saga, but I think I have a handful of cards from the Fusion Saga, but I can't for the life of me remember buying Kid Buu anything. By that point, I had graduated high school and was busy with college. The game still has a cult following and an active player base who get together and play at conventions and events. Because the cards aren't super popular, they can be hard to find, and sealed boosters run in the thousands. Many older packs from the Saiyan Saga era have started to have the seals of the packs split open over time, so be careful if you're out there looking on eBay. Next, we have the US Playing Card Company. If you've never heard of it, they only made one game. But they made the X-Files collectible card game. It was unique in that it wasn't about directly attacking your opponent's life total. Instead, it was a game of deduction and misdirection, kind of like Clue. The goal was to be the first player to correctly guess or identify your opponent's secret X-Files card. Each player had a face-down X-File card that represented the supernatural entity or case that you were investigating. The game was divided into several phases and turns, and players alternated who was investigating each player and who was trying to deflect the other player from figuring out the game. There were various gameplay terms like an investigation phase, a skill check, asking questions, deduction, and victory. That's when you got to figure out and take a guess as to, I think your X-File is Tombs or something, and if it wasn't, then you had to keep going. The problem with this, of course, is that if you were playing against someone like me who had memorized all the X-Files episodes and everything about them, I could guess what your X-File was very quickly. And it wasn't that much fun of a game if you were playing supposedly with other fans of the show who would also know what all the things were. And so it was kind of like, it was fun to collect more than it was to play. And that's basically what we did with it. The official sets released in 1996 with the premiere set. In 1997, there was a 10-13-61 set. And then the final one was a set called The Truth Is Out There, which was a reprint of the premiere set, which fixed a lot of issues from the premiere set, which, hilariously, I opened some packs like this from the original set. The way they sorted and collated the cards was wrong at the printers, and so you would get packs of nothing but uncommons or packs of nothing but ultra rares. And so I got a pack of all the ultra rares. Like, oh, I collected all the ultra rares. This is great. But it made it very difficult to play and collect that way when the booster packs were messed up like that. So the Truth Is Out There set was supposed to fix that, but at that point the game was dead. It had only lasted 2 years, and there was supposed to be another set after that. The game was discontinued shortly when the company decided to stop making games. Next we have Konami. Konami makes video games. Konami also makes a card game known as Yu-Gi-Oh! It began in 96 as a manga where the protagonist Yugi battles opponents in these elaborate card game duels. In 2002, the anime was dubbed by 4Kids Entertainment and launched in North America, leading to the release of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game with Konami's partner Upper Deck. The game's ties to the popular TV show, which showed players exactly how to play, led to the massive and rapid rise in popularity, making it a direct competitor to Pokemon and Magic. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is still on the shelves. Same packs and boosters have been sitting there for months. I remember when the game came out because I was working in a comic book store in Dallas when this was released. It was a huge deal for kids who were just getting into the show. We didn't run events for Yu-Gi-Oh! Yet, but sold a ton of it during our 2 Pokemon events. We separated their Pokemon events into kids tournaments and adult tournaments so that little Bryce didn't have to instantly lose to a 30-year-old guy in his purple minivan that we banned from the shop for selling cards in the parking lot. But the game was novel because the game was just like the one in the show. You knew what cards were good because you saw them played by the characters. I've never played a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! In my life, but I know what the pieces of Exodia are and what a Blue Eyes White Dragon is. I think the strangest part of this game is the shape of the cards themselves. 99% of collectible cards out there have corners similar to a deck of playing cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has very, very pointed edges, not as stark as, say, a baseball card, which is literally just complete 100% pointy corners. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has pointed tips with just barely the ends rounded off. I noticed this when I went to my friend's house and saw her little brother playing with a deck that was wrapped up in rubber bands, and I couldn't help but think how easy it would be to accidentally bend a corner and have a card that was now too easy to notice in a deck. These were the days we still played Magic and Pokemon cards without sleeves. Most other card games we played without sleeves because they were cheap and we were just playing with them, not storing them in a binder to look at 25 years later. So how did this one work? The goal was to reduce your opponent's life points from 8,000 to 0. You can also win by forcing your opponent to draw from an empty deck, or by a specific card effect, most famously the Exodia cards, finding all the pieces to Exodia. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not a resource-based game like Magic and Pokemon. You don't need to play a land or have mana to play cards. You summon monsters and play spell trap cards as long as you meet the conditions to play them. There's various draw phases, standby phases, main phases, battle phase, another main phase, and an end phase. But just like Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has what's called the chain link system to resolve card effects. Because everyone's just playing cards down, you have to go back through the order that they were played to figure out what happens next. And it's similar to the stack in Magic. Finally, we have the last card maker, Bandai. Bandai made Yu-Gi-Oh! I know I just said that Konami made the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game in the US, but before Konami's official CCG, Bandai produced a short-lived Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game in 1998, based on the early manga, but it was Bandai's initial attempt to capitalize on the property. In 1999, they created the Digimon card game. This was Bandai's first attempt into the CCG market. It was originally released in 1999 in Japan, and the English version came out in 2000. It was based on the Digimon anime and toy line, featuring the Digivolving mechanic. They also created a Gundam War trading card game. It was only released in Japan, and it was a super complex game. Today, Bandai is actually one of the larger CCG makers in the market, with games like Dragon Ball Super, Gundam, One Piece, and Union Arena. To wrap this up, we need to take a look at what caused the spike in the card game market and what enticed players to jump into these games. When I first got into CCGs, it was because I knew the IP associated with the game. In my case, Dragon Ball Z. My friends got into the Star Wars game because of the movie. Kids got into Pokemon because of the video game and TV show. Even Magic the Gathering isn't immune to this. A game designed to be played between rounds of a tabletop RPG featuring spells, goblins, orcs, and magic lands sounds like high fantasy. It was made for fans of games like D&D, but games like Magic had to expand past the premise of generic fantasy and create their own lore and worlds to make the game survive over the years. The majority of the dead games I've gone over today were based on TV shows or movies that have limited content for something like a long-running collectible card game. Sports cards have a never-ending supply of new players and teams to make cards out of. Pokemon comes out with a new region and new Pokemon all the time. Sure, many of these game companies were bought out or left the CCG place because of other problems, but how many expansions can you really squeeze out of a single movie or cartoon that lasted one season? Printing cards is cheaper than making action figures and board games. Printing cardboard is just printing money at the time. Just not when everyone's printing at the same time. If you like this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to check out the other episodes. Thanks for listening. And this year we had Foundations, Innistrad Remastered, Aether Drift, Tarkir Dragonstorm, Final Fantasy, Edge of Eternity, Spider-Man, and in a month or so we're getting Avatar: The Last Airbender.